Eric, I want to respond to your video. I'm not really sure why exactly. I have some idea. I mean, there are certain people there are only certain people you can have certain conversations with, and the conversation about truth is not one that many people either want to have or can have, are capable of having. Whenever you talk about spiritual development, I think it's necessarily controversial. It's a controversial conversation because those who hear the realized voice, which claims that it has developed, those who hear this claim are in some sense immediately put on the defensive because in responding, they have to show that they in fact are also realized. Then there's this question of whether or not realization can necessarily be put into words, and whether or not there is necessarily a relationship between eloquence and wisdom. Plato criticized the sophists for being mere rhetoricians, for being deceitful in the way that they mesmerize or transfix their audiences by using words in an artful and creative way, without actually, though, conveying any truth. If one's a good speaker, it's pretty easy to convince an audience of almost anything. But not all good speakers are necessarily wise. Well, my original question was, does wisdom or does realization necessarily provide you with eloquent speech, with poetic expression? I'm not sure about that. It's an open question. When I think about it philosophically, because I do possess this knowledge of the history of philosophy, so I call upon it. Well, I think of Hegel, who, for whom wisdom is a kind of complete speech, a possession of the logos, or perhaps possession by the logos, would be wisdom. And so for him, for a philosopher, sort of bringing Christian religious dogma to the philosophical, conceptual level of what Hegel called a science, but a science of the spirit rather than of nature. For Hegel, philosophy is the science of the spirit. Christ becomes Logos. And it's not just the imitation of Christ that's important for Hegel, but the recognition and the realization that one is identical with the image of Christ. That one is not just a likeness, but an image. and that the Logos is something present in each of us. Really, that it's the seed from which our own soul sprouts. The soul that we think is our own, even though we don't know that. We're born with a body that we didn't consciously choose, and with attitudes and fears and neuroses and psychological issues that we didn't necessarily choose either. Not that we're not responsible for tending to our habits and the formation of routines and rituals, but much of our bodily and psychological existence is a given. It's a gift, and the religious life seems to be a kind of response to that gift, whereas the irreligious life is an avoidance of this fact that life is given, and only after it's given do we have the opportunity to try to make something. But if there really is some kind of a spiritual development, and if language is involved in this development, then where are we headed exactly? What is the human being a midpoint between, animal and what? Angel? Are we trying to lift ourselves to a transhuman mode of communion by the power of our logical expression, in the sense of expression of the Logos? Because I don't think Logos is possessed by an individual. The individual is possessed by the Logos, of which there is but one. And so my realization would not be other than your realization, which would not be other than anyone else's realization, which is why I think we need a process model of enlightenment, so that we recognize that enlightenment is an ongoing achievement. It's an enlightening. But not only that it has to be reestablished in every moment. Because human beings and karma, the karma that we share, affects all of us, right? And even the enlightened, so long as they take on incarnate form and interact with others in the world, so long as they eat and shit, they are subject to the unenlightened state of the world. Which is not to say that light cannot be brought into that darkness through certain channels, certain conduits, which I think is the basic goal of the spiritual life or the religious life. It's to be a conduit of light. And I'm glad to have found another brother on the path whose light shines as bright.